Welcome to Skullface Horror Stories. This is where you come when you and yours want to get scared. This video is brought to you by Scream For Me Inc. Are you looking for some of the best horror merch around? Check out screamformeinc.com. They have hundreds of different patch designs. They have wallets, bags, hats, phone cases, and yeah, even home decor. And the best part is, if you don't see what you're looking for, they do custom items too. Just go to the contact section, email them, and they'll be happy to help you out. And for all of my awesome viewers, they're giving a 10% discount on everything. Just enter in the discount code Skullface during checkout. I just moved to a town in New Mexico. I used to live in New Hampshire, so it was quite the move. I had to move here because of my job. It's mostly just phone security. We specialize in a new type of phone security that prohibits spam, robocalls, and scammers. It pays fairly well. The town that I moved to is close to the border of Texas and has a population of about 50,000 people, so not very many. I'm also an active member of the church. Well, I was until the move. About 3 days after I got to town, I received a letter in the mail. The letter wrote, "Mr. Greenway, we have noticed you are the newest member of our town, and we would like to welcome you. We see you're an active member of the church, and we would like to invite you to join us. It's about 5 miles outside of town, and it's well worth it. We look forward to having you. Our address is on the letter. And welcome to Oaksville." The letter wasn't typed, and it was handwritten in cursive, so it's clearly not just spam. I decided I'll attend the Sunday service tomorrow at 9 p.m., which is an odd time for the church to have a service, but I was willing to see what it was about. The rest of the day continued as normal, and everything went all right until Sunday. The day was normal until I went to the service. As I drove up, the first thing I noticed was that there were no cars in the gravel parking lot. The church was also in the middle of nowhere. I was the only one there, and I thought I was just early, but I looked at the clock. It was 8:55 p.m. I decided to wait in the car until 9 and then go into the building, which didn't look like a church. There wasn't a crucifix in sight on the exterior of the building. As soon as the clock struck 9 p.m., I got out of my car and slowly and cautiously walked up to the building. As I walked, I scanned the surrounding area and forest. Something just didn't sit right with me about this place. As I approached the door, a thought entered my mind. Do I knock on the door or just go in? I decided to just enter, and when I did, I was extremely surprised. The service was just about to start. The pews were filled with people. I was greeted by someone standing at the door. He welcomed me and addressed me by my full name. He told me he was glad that I received their letter, and they were all glad that I came. He escorted me to a seat on a pew. My name was written on a piece of paper and taped onto the pew when we arrived at the seat. I sat down, and the man who escorted me quickly hurried back in the direction of the door and disappeared into the dark. I turned back around to watch the service. I noticed there were no crucifixes on the interior either. The preacher, I guess you could call him, was dressed oddly. He wasn't wearing your typical Catholic or Christian attire. He was dressed in a dark maroon robe, and the people attending the service were dressed normally, as was I. He began preaching in a language I've never heard before. It sounded like Latin and German put together. I looked around and the other people looked intrigued. They could somehow tell what he was saying, and after about 10 or 15 minutes of that preaching, he went through a door on the side of the stage. He came back about 3 minutes later with a white ceramic bowl. It was very large. He set it on the holder it belonged to. It was an altar. He began to preach in English. He was talking about something very strange now. It was some mystical sounding creature. I would tell you the name of it, but it wasn't of this language. It was so impossible to pronounce, but he pronounced it with ease. As he was preaching about this creature, his voice began to rise. He then unsheathed a knife from his belt. The knife looked ancient. The blade was stained a dark reddish brown on the edges. It was a double-sided blade. The handle looked to be made out of bone, and it was wrapped in what looked like human flesh. People began getting up. They walked toward the altar and put their hands out. The preacher walked over and slit the hands of the man who had just gone to the altar. Blood gushed out of his hands and began to fill the large white bowl. The blood flowed like water. I was frozen in fear. I had no idea what to do. This isn't a place of God. This wasn't right at all. I watched in horror as the man fell down and tumbled down the side of the ramp that led to the altar. He was dead from blood loss. The next person came up and held out their hands. I decided it was time for me to leave. I got up, and as soon as I did, everyone in the room immediately turned to me. They looked at me with absolute disgust and anger. "You will remain seated until your time has come," the preacher said sternly. "Look, thank you for inviting me, but I don't think this church is for me." I tried to say calmly. My voice was shaking with fear. "You will remain seated until your time has come," the people all said in unison. I thought this was enough. I decided to make a run for it. I quickly dashed toward the front door, and as I approached it, I was slammed to the ground. It was the man who escorted me to my seat. I punched him in the face as hard as I could, and he rolled off. I quickly got up and burst through the doors. I could hear footsteps behind me. The car would take too long, so I just ran for it. I took off down the gravel road and sprinted the 5 miles back home, never slowing down once. I only stopped once I got to my driveway, and I threw up in the grass. I looked behind me. There was nobody there. I ran inside and I locked the door. I called 911 and told them about what had just happened. They arrived at the scene of the crime and opened the door. What they told me was there was a large symbol painted on the floor in blood, lifeless, contorted body surrounding it. The preacher was covered in blood. His body was also contorted. He was still alive, screaming in a strange voice in the same language that I heard earlier. His bones were bent and broken in impossible ways. He quickly became hostile and charged at the officers. He picked up one of them and just threw him like a rag doll. The officer shot him a total of 46 times before he finally went down. The policeman told me the story as he gave me a ride back to the church to get my car. After that night, life continued like normal. The town covered up what had happened, blaming it on a simple drug-related crime. And the town hasn't spoken of the crime since. But I will never forget what happened. Thank you for listening. Click the video on the right to hear more creepypastas, or click the video on the left to hear true, scary stories. Until next time, always look back. Or don't.